Tonight, we have 10 stories covering a handful of different topics, from late night runs, 911 calls, and much, much more. A huge thank you to tonight's writers. Without them, this video would not be possible. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. Stories can be submitted at my subreddit, r/slumberreads. Please be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. In my hometown, there's one rule everyone follows. Never go out when it looks like it's going to rain. It sounds like common sense to not go out in the rain, but for some reason, it's treated like a law in my town. It's even taught in schools. There's signs all over town. The local news will even tell you not to go outside. Not only that, you can't even look outside if it's really bad. I tried to open the curtains once, just to see what it looked like, when my father yanked me away and threw them shut. It was one of the only times he yelled at me. It was on one such cloudy day that me and my cousin Dylan, he was about 10 and I was 14, sat playing board games in my room. Our parents had gone out to some kind of party, and we were stuck alone with Monopoly and the like. We would have been playing on my game system, but an unfortunate accident involved my half-asleep father, and a forgotten roller skate had rendered it broken. I had just collected $200 from Pass and Go when Dylan rolled onto his back and proclaimed a phrase that's second nature to young children. "I'm bored." I looked up at him. "Well, if you want, we can watch TV." He sighed loudly. "There's nothing good on TV. I hate being cooped up inside. Why can't we go outside anyway?" "Because it's cloudy," I responded while organizing my paper money. He sat up and looked at me. "And why's that?" I looked up at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, why can't we go outside? Because it's cloudy? It's not like the rain is gonna kill you." I shrugged. "Let's ask our parents when they get back." He let out a long, exasperated sigh, and I internally sighed. He was not going to let this go. I looked at him. "Then let's go look out the window." He perked up at that. "Really? Let's go." He rushed upstairs and I followed. I didn't really share his enthusiasm or curiosity. What's the worst that could happen? At most, it would probably just rain and he'd complain some more. As we got upstairs and went to the window, he was practically bouncing with excitement. I opened the thick curtains on the window a crack. I was afraid of a neighbor seeing and telling my parents. And the scene that greeted me was exactly what I expected. Nothing. It was the usual street, just devoid of people taking their pets for a walk or cars driving around. The sky was dark and gray, the clouds hanging so low, they almost looked like they'd touched the tops of the trees in the distance. As I looked at it, I saw some patches that were slightly darker than the rest. I didn't think much of it. It must just be a weird weather phenomena. Dylan looked for a while before he started to shift and looked at me. "Nothing's happening." I shrugged. "I told you. Probably won't even rain. It hardly does around here, even when it's as cloudy as it is now." He sighed and looked out again, then paused. "What's that?" I looked up and out the window to whatever he was pointing at. For a moment, I didn't know what he meant. Then I noticed it. It was some kind of cord dangling from the sky. It was thick, about the thickness of a power line, and it just hung there, unmoving. When I tried following it up with my eyes, I saw it just led into the clouds. Dylan started walking towards the door and I stopped him. "What are you doing?" "I want to go see what it is. It's a cord. That's all. But where does it lead?" I didn't have an answer to that one. Maybe it was connected to a weather balloon. But if that's the case, wouldn't it be floating around? Before I could stop him, Dylan opened the door and ran out. I stood in the doorway and watched him. A part of me wanted to chase after him, but another part was scared. And it wasn't just the fear of being caught and getting in trouble. It was some kind of deep, primal fear. My brain kept telling me something was wrong, and that I should run inside and hide. Before I could decide what to do, Dylan made it to the cord and looked it up and down. He turned to me and yelled, "It looks slimy." I blinked at that. Slimy? What kind of power cord is slimy? Maybe it just looks slimy. I was about to call him when suddenly he reached out and grabbed it. As soon as he did, I froze. I don't know what I expected to happen, but for some reason, I was scared. Like I expected to shock him or something, but nothing happened. He turned to me and yelled again. It feels weird. By this point, I was deeply unsettled and called for him to come inside. I saw him roll his eyes and turn to me. Fine, whatever. He started to walk towards me, but didn't let go of the cord. I called for him to let it go, and he turned to it and looked confused. I saw him shake his hand a few times, but the cord never left his hand. But now he looked panicked and started to flail about. It won't come off. It won't let go of my hand. It's stuck. I was about to step out of my doorway and run to help him when suddenly, before I could even process what was happening, he flew straight up into the air. I was frozen in place as I watched him get pulled further and further up towards the clouds, kicking and screaming for help. And then, just before he vanished from sight, I saw something that froze the blood in my veins. 4 long, segmented legs slowly descended from the clouds and grabbed Dylan. As I watched, they wrapped him in the same cord that had trapped him and retreated into the clouds, into the same dark spot I saw earlier, which began to move before my eyes, quickly making its way to the horizon and out of sight. When my parents returned home, they found me curled up on the floor in the basement. There were no signs of Dylan. When I explained what I saw, I expected them to say I was lying or tell me I had a bad nightmare. Instead, they looked at each other sadly and told me it was going to be okay. The next time I saw Dylan's parents was a few days later. I was in my room when I heard crying downstairs in the living room. I slowly made my way to the stairs and peeked into the living room. I saw Dylan's mom and dad, my aunt and uncle, sitting on the couch. My aunt was crying while my uncle tried to comfort her. I quietly went back upstairs. I couldn't face them. It's been years since then. I've since moved out of my hometown and into a city. I live a pretty normal life and keep to myself, but I still haven't completely recovered from what I saw. I never go out when it's cloudy. I don't know if what I saw was confined to only my town or if there are more, but I also never fly on planes because I'm terrified of what I'll see when I'm on the other side of the clouds. This is a story from a couple of years ago when we went camping in a random set of woods. It was post-GCSE, and a group of lads and I thought it would be a good idea to go camping in a woodland around 5 miles away from our town for a couple of days. So the day came, and we brought the camping gear and set off walking to the spot. We got there and set up 2 tents in an opening in the middle of the woods, which we had never really seen before. It was a very picturesque spot, and had beautiful views over the town. It was quite a climb to get up to the spot, and we were quite tired from the trek. We brought a one-time use barbecue and a pack of sausages and bacon with rolls. We also sat around a campfire for many hours of the night. It was surprisingly eerie throughout the night. You couldn't even hear the swaying of the trees, and only the speech and crackling of the fire, which was quite relaxing. I checked my watch for the time and it was around 1:45. I said to the lads something along the lines of, "We need a good night's sleep," as it was getting later and later. So we all got settled in the 2 tents, having 3 people in each and sleeping on mats we used when we went on a school camp. Most of the lads were sleeping, as we could hear them all snoring. However, my friend Mike and I couldn't get to sleep. The relaxing atmosphere had changed, and something just didn't feel right. The atmosphere changing into something more sinister. I heard some very strange noises. Mike and I turned our heads to each other, however, laughing it off, as one of the lads in the tent next to us was a prankster, and was most likely trying to scare us. The strange sounds continued, and it became clear that the sounds were not coming from the tent next to us, but in the near distance in the woods. We wanted to go out and look. However, we were tired, and didn't want to get out of our sleeping bags, so we decided to do rock, paper, scissors. Whoever lost had to go out and check what the noise was. I won, so Mike went out with a torch. He was gone for a couple of minutes and I was beginning to get worried. I heard someone or something approaching the tent. My heart racing, I looked inside. Mike was outside, but he looked different. His normally tan face was now pasty, with a facial expression of solemn dread and terror riddled upon his face. He then said, "We have to leave now. stuttering and shaking as he said it. The other mate in our tent, looking very alarmed as he just woke up. I got up, grabbed my bag, and we woke up the lads in the other tent, and I told them what Mike said. They all got up as Mike had never lied before. They got their rucksacks, and we started running full speed down the hill. At the bottom, I quickly glanced back, shining my torch up to the top. I wasn't 100% sure. However, I thought I saw a slender arm and hand wrap around one of the trees. I turned back around and we continued running. We weren't able to call anyone to pick us up as it was very late. We barely spoke on the way back. All terrified. We ended up staying around James' house, a boy in the other tent, speaking nothing of what happened. The next day we went back to pull down the tents. However, when we got there, our tents weren't there, and no sign of them anywhere. However, a strange marking on the floor and trees. To this day, it keeps me up late at night wondering what was up there, and what could have happened if we stayed there, and whether we will ever experience it again. The questions are endless, and so is the terror. Has anyone else experienced something similar? I've been awake for 4 days, and I don't know how much longer I can last. A few hours maybe, not through another night. It comes closer when I sleep. I'm so tired I can't focus, drifting off if I sit down, forgetting what I'm doing. I don't even know why I'm posting here. The name, I think, caught my eye. No sleep. I need something to do, to keep me awake. When I close my eyes, I can feel it, watching me. Too long and it begins to move. I'll snap awake to glance a shadow in the distance, movement out the corner of my eye, so I can't sleep, or it will reach me. I can't let it reach me again. The 4 nights since it began feel like a lifetime. I was lying half asleep in bed, little after midnight. I always keep the windows open and I thought I heard movement in my yard. A cat, I thought, or maybe a fox. I tried to ignore it, but no. This sounded different. I got up and went to the window to look out. It's strange how we change when we are alone. Before my wife died, I would have ignored it, I think. Dismissed it as paranoia. I wouldn't have been struggling to sleep in the first place. Not with her beside me. She might have heard it, and I would have told her not to worry. But she's been gone for 2 years, and I'm a lonely old man. So worried, and looked. Nothing. No cats or foxes, barely a breeze in the dark, just trees and grass and weak moonlight. I went back to bed, but in a few moments I heard it again. The same sound. Movement. Something at the window downstairs. Or maybe the door. Stupid, I thought. Just the wind. But no harm to check. I pulled on a shirt, flipped on the lights, and went downstairs. Nothing now, of course. Still, I closed the windows and checked all the doors were locked. The house was always so quiet on my own. I climbed back into bed and tried to relax. Deep breaths. I remember thinking how I had to get a decent night's sleep, and I wouldn't be any use the next day. Not a young man anymore. An hour or so passed, I think, before another sound snapped me awake. A creak from the stairs. I didn't move, just lay in the dark, eyes wide open, listening. I didn't have any pets. All the doors and windows were closed. The stairs only creaked with weight on them. I breathed slowly, silently. After a few minutes, I sat up, looking at my door in the darkness. Nothing. I walked slowly to the door, opened it a crack and peered through. Nothing there. I opened it further. Of course there was nothing there. Stupid. I was a little angry with myself now. Slammed the door and pulled the covers up around my neck. 15 minutes maybe before I was asleep again. I didn't really wake when I heard it. It was just a faint scraping noise, like a nail pulled across cloth. I barely felt it. Something sharp dragged across the covers at my feet. I opened my eyes and looked into the dark. It was standing at the end of my bed. In the snatches of sleep I have since, I see my wife. Before she passed, exhausted and frail, trying to keep her eyes open. It seemed like she wanted to tell me something, but the words never came. We didn't have children, no family still alive to speak of. It wasn't a problem when we had each other, but when someone is the world to you, and you lose them, you've lost everything. I begin to dream of her, and then I feel it watching, see the memory of its hunched shoulders and long arms, reaching. No, stay awake, push it away. I couldn't go home after it happened. I tried to stay around people, busy places I could stay awake, where I wouldn't be allowed to sleep, the streets of the city center. I want to ask for help, but who do I ask? I would look and sound like a crazy old man, dirty and exhausted, living on the street. Maybe I'm not thinking straight. Too tired, too scared. How would anyone help anyway? Even if they did believe me, what if it hurt them too, and it was my fault? I don't know why this is happening to me, so I don't know if I can pass it to someone else. Can't be responsible for that. I would think I was going crazy, if it weren't for the bruises where it touched me. I waited until a public bathroom was empty and looked in the mirror. It's not really bruises. My skin is turning black, peeling away around my neck in the shape of those long, thin fingers. I try to hide it under my collar, but it burns to touch. I don't want to think about it anymore. I can see the bridge from here. I'm thinking about jumping in the river to end this, but then I think, what if it is there in the deep, waiting for me, always so cold? I can't seem to heat up. The night is here, and the streets are getting quiet, getting dark. My numb old fingers too cold to type. My eyes are stinging, eyelids heavy. I can't stay awake any longer. Why am I writing this? I don't know. I just want someone to know I was here, I think. I didn't just disappear. It's come closer. I can feel it. I can't stay awake. I worked later than usual that night. I typically get off at around 6 p.m., but I stayed until about 9:15 to help out. Whatever. I could use the extra few bucks, and I didn't have any plans aside from going for a run. I never run at night as my neighborhood can get a little sketchy, but I was feeling wired and figured I'd burn off some energy. There's a trail around the corner from my house that is pretty well lit, so the plan was to just do a quick run and then relax before I was ready for bed. I left the house, walked for a few minutes. Then once I got to the trail, I started to jog. The breeze gently blowing against the trees and gravel under my feet calmed me down for some reason. It was cathartic. The trail is always busy during the day, so getting out there without anyone else was enjoyable. The serenity of the trail felt like an escape. It felt like I was the only person on the planet, which is something I don't think I've experienced before. I liked it. As I continued on, I began to approach a faint sound just off the trail. It was difficult to make out at first, but the sound of a metal shovel piercing through dirt was unmistakable. I heard it every few seconds. Curiosity got the best of me and I slowed down. My mind couldn't think of any reasonable explanation as to why someone would be digging late at night, and my curiosity gave way to nervousness. I casually stopped jogging and then the sound stopped. The silence was bizarrely loud. I'm so used to the sound of cars and people that I didn't know what dead silence even sounded like. The lighting only illuminated parts of the trail and didn't reach the trees, so I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I scanned it from left to right, not really sure if I wanted to see anything or not. Then I heard it, breathing. The night was so quiet that I could actually hear someone breathing in and out, but I couldn't see them. If I could hear them breathe, then whoever was there could hear me. That was enough reason for me to just get the hell out of there. I turned around and started to quickly run back to the start of the trail, about 2 kilometers away. That's when I heard it. The very sound that I felt was so calming just a few minutes ago was terrifying. It was the sound of my feet impacting the gravel trail, but now it wasn't just mine. I was being chased. I ran as fast as my legs were capable of going, but panic was setting in. I turned my head to catch a glimpse of whoever was chasing me, but I could barely make anything out. Even with the lighting on the trail, all I could see was a dark figure, and it was coming for me. I was confident that I could outrun them, but I came to the horrible realization that they were actually closing the distance on me. I wasn't expecting them to be able to catch up to me, but they were. I swear I started to feel their breath on the back of my neck. I was getting tired, but I pumped my legs as hard as I could, They were right behind me. In the distance, I finally saw the opening of the trail and could only pray that I wasn't caught before I reached the street. I could hear a low grunting that felt like it was right in my ear. I was mere feet from the opening when I felt a hand grab the back of my shirt. I had one last burst of energy and pulled myself away and ran into the middle of the street. I whipped around, exhausted, but I was going to have to fight whatever was behind me. A dark figure stood in the opening of the trail. We stared at each other for what seemed like hours. I fought the urge to just collapse on the ground from exhaustion and fear, but I managed to find the strength to turn around and run. I got home, opened the door, locked it, and sat with my back against it, not wanting to move. I woke up in the morning, still leaned against my front door. I got up, trying to piece together what happened. I walked over to the window and peered out. I was overjoyed at the sight of daylight and people walking their dogs and kids playing, all the things that made every day normal. I then looked down, and that's when I saw the large footprints all over the porch. Last night, around 11 p.m., I was laying in bed on my phone when I started hearing unusual noises from outside. Whenever I hear noises outside, my first thought is the wind, squirrels, etc. But these noises were different. I don't know how to explain it, but they didn't sound natural and were consistent for at least 10 minutes. For context, I live in a small home on my grandparents' property behind their house, and my house backs up directly to a main road. My bedroom is the entire top floor, and the upstairs has a door that leads directly to a patio and deck area that's only accessible via stairs on the outside of my house. So if someone is on the deck, they can look directly into my bedroom from the outside because of the windows on the door. After a while of hearing these noises and feeling uneasy, I stacked pillows on my bed in hopes that if someone was out there looking around, they wouldn't see me laying in bed. I was also scared that I'd see someone there, so I blocked the view of the door as best as possible to make me feel more comfortable. Soon after that, I increasingly became more uneasy to the point of recording myself in the dark saying, "I heard something outside my bedroom door, but I don't want to lean forward." That was at 11:07 p.m. As I'm typing this, I went back to listen to the recording, and you can hear a slight thud right after I pause. I try to brush it off, and after 10 minutes or so, I no longer hear anything. I'm more at ease and I doze off to sleep. Which brings me to now. My grandma walks over to my place to give me something. While she's doing that, she asks if I was outside around my house last night with a flashlight, and immediate panic sets in. She says my grandfather saw someone walking around my house with a flashlight last night. Thought it was maybe me, but wasn't sure, so after a few minutes, he made his way to the back door to check. But by that time, they were gone. I've had odd things happening to me since last October. Someone tried to break into my car in broad daylight, with people all around, and with a bright red light flashing in my car indicating it's locked. Someone tried to pick or pop the lock with a hammer or crowbar. I was house sitting half a mile from where I live, and I'm almost certain whoever did it had probably been watching me. Other odd things have happened too, but I usually brush them off to avoid anxious thoughts. It makes me uneasy given I just moved out here at the beginning of the year. My disabled uncle had lived out here for 30 years before I moved out here and had never utilized the upstairs. Maybe lights being on upstairs all of a sudden has piqued the interest of others. My uncle only had one incident similar to this, but it was years ago. Also, since I've been renovating there, are random things like glassware, a bed frame, a lamp, etc. sitting on my desk. But nothing was touched, nothing was taken, which is more unsettling to me than if something was taken. Also, random side note, but maybe not. Last week we had a bad storm in our area around midnight. Constant lightning, loud thunder, heavy rain and wind. Me, loving storms, decided to step outside on my deck to record some of it. After a couple of minutes I heard screams in the distance as a car started approaching on the main road. Directly after the scream was a long drawn out "help." And then right as they were passing my house, there was a loud but short "help me." I heard this all in real time and was shocked I caught it on video. Why was the passenger window down in a storm? They were genuine screams that sounded to be female, and were very loud to have been caught on video. Although you can see my house from the main road, you wouldn't be able to see someone standing outside above the road given the tree cover and how dark it was. It's just strange. There's weird stuff happening and I don't know how to explain it. I just bought a security camera to place outside so I'll have better peace of mind once it's installed. Maybe I should start trusting my gut instinct more often. Goes to show how easy it is to sense the presence of someone, even if you don't see them. This happened in my hometown in southern Ontario. One night I was at my friend's place, and we decided to go out for a walk and have a smoke. There was a little kids' park on a hill just around the corner from his place that was on a hill. The only lighting was at the top of the hill where the road was. The bottom of the hill was completely dark. Halfway down the hill, there was a park bench we decided to sit at for a while. We were talking when we both noticed a glowing red orb floating across the bottom of the hill, and we were both commenting to each other, trying to figure out what the hell we were both looking at. The red orb stopped while we were questioning what it was. When we noticed a second appearing, it was as though you were initially seeing the side profile of a face, and the second orb appeared the same way you would see a person's eyes while they turned their head towards you. We stopped talking and watched whatever it was, staring at us a little longer before unanimously deciding to get the hell out of there. We still watched it go to the other side of the bottom of the hill as we were quickly making our way back up to the street. The thing is, the bottom of the hill on the far side, the direction it had been walking towards, was in an opening to the street where a small bit of light from the streetlights came through. And when it got to the light, we saw an 8-foot tall, lanky black figure. It was pure black, as though it was absorbing the light that touched it. We made our way back to his place. At the time, not realizing we had to walk past the same spot, and I hung around until early morning when the sun was coming up, before I had the nerve to leave his place and head home. He came to me the next day and told me that night, his neighbor claimed to have heard a loud thump on his roof, as though something had jumped on it. The neighbor heard for around 2 minutes a lot of scratching and tearing before the sound stopped. Whatever it was that we had seen followed us, and ripped half the shingles off the neighbor's roof in 2 minutes. I didn't believe him initially, but when I went by his place that day after school and saw the neighbors had tarped off their roof and there was pieces of shingle all over the place, I've never known what it was we saw, but I've always wanted to know. I've heard stories of others seeing the same thing in my old hometown, but the amount of people was very limited. Does anyone know what it is? I live in a rural area in the north of the UK. About 20 minutes outside of the village I live in is a large complex of abandoned buildings. I haven't ever been able to get a straight answer on what these used to be. Some say an old farm, others say it was an RAF, a UK Air Force base. Either way, it is a cool place to explore and any kid's dream. I'm older now, 18, male, but I practically grew up here, spending many summers at this place with my group of mates. We're all older now, so we don't go anymore. I mentioned how many times I have been to demonstrate how comfortable I am with this place. Any creepy feelings usually associated with abandoned buildings have worn off because of how many times I have been here. I should also mention that in all my time of visiting this place, with my friends, we have never seen anyone else there. It was kind of like our place. Tonight I was chilling with a mate at my house. We were both going to separate universities in a few weeks, so we were feeling quite reflective, and started talking about our childhoods, and in particular, our many trips to these abandoned buildings. Eventually, although it was late, curiosity got the better of us and we decided to hop in his car and drive the short journey to this place. When we got there, it was pitch black, and we had absolutely no gear except the torches on our phones. He had even come straight from work, so was in his formal suit. We arrived at the place and began walking around, looking in all the buildings and recounting stories of all the summers we had spent here. We were talking carelessly and loud. In hindsight, this was probably a mistake. We were quite deep in the complex when it started. The loud tapping. The sound of metal on metal. It startled us and we both jumped. In an effort to calm ourselves down, we told each other it was probably the wind. It didn't take us long to work out that this couldn't be the case. The tapping has a rhythm to it, but it was one that would keep on changing. A few times it would even have a recognizable tune such as Queen, We Will Rock You. At this point, me and my mate were terrified. We started to, slowly, as quietly as possible, go back the way we had come and towards where his car was parked. We had only made it a few meters when I accidentally stepped on a bit of MDF, board lying on the floor. It snapped with what felt like the loudest sound in the world. At that point, the tapping abruptly stopped and everything went silent. We started to creep away again. We'd only made it a bit further when something I will never forget, but wish I could, happened. We heard a voice. It sounded mad. It was loud and clear enough to hear, a man's voice, and it was speaking English, but what it was saying didn't make sense. Just a random jumble of words and phrases blurted out without any pause. At this point, we both broke. We sprinted towards the way out, suppressing the urge to scream like kids. As we were running to the entrance, we ran past another building. As we ran past, quite loudly this time we heard another voice. It was a man's voice again, but definitely different from the first one. This was saying a similar assortment of nothing, but we didn't stop to listen. We sprinted full tilt till we got to his car, hurled ourselves in, and screeched off. We got back to mine and practically hugged each other for the rest of the night. It might not sound that creepy now, but something about those voices coming from the abandoned buildings put fear in the animal part of my brain. I hope you guys enjoyed reading this. I know I really didn't enjoy living it. It's put a weird end to a place otherwise associated with a good childhood memory. I don't know if I'll ever want to go back. Stay safe, everyone. I put on the suit again this morning. Still tight. Damn it. Can't wear this on my first day. It was a cold February morning, and it was my first day of my first job as a hitman. No suit in the world is ever going to fit you unless you complete your first job in it. I turned around. It was only my dad. "I'm a bit nervous, Dad," I said in a low tone, hoping he wouldn't hear it. "It's okay, son. It's first day jitters. You'll shake 'em off," he said, which was so unlike my dad. He was always the stern, unrelating type of parent. Growing up with one parent is never easy, but it's a lot tougher with someone like my dad around. Or not around. Whichever way you want to look at it, really. "With all due respect, sir, it's easy for you to say, since you were one of the best in the business," I said, with all the courage I could muster. He looked me right in the eyes, and that did something unfathomable to me. He smiled. "Tell you what, since you're stressed out, why don't I tell you a story from my old days to help you take the edge off?" he said warmly. By then I did not know this man. What changed? More importantly, when did it change? "Okay then," I replied. Weird as it may have been, it's always fun to hear your old man's experience, especially when you had a job this interesting. It took me back to why I took this up in the first place. A perfect student with a cliched bright future awaiting him. I was never pushed into this life. I chose it of my own accord. Because it was just so fascinating. The thrill of it drew me toward it like a hound of blood. "Well, son, do you know the first rule of business in our life?" Of course I did. The more dangerous a job, the more it pays. This was the most basic principle in the job. Higher the risk, higher the reward. Now, son, I've been doing this job a while, and I had taken on my fair share of high-paying jobs. He stumbled a little, even slightly afraid. "Are you okay, Dad?" I asked him. "I once got a job offer for $100K. To put things in context, it was 10 times the amount paid for a high-end job. My jaw was dropped. My interest peaked. And for the first time this morning, I didn't feel the suit as an uncomfortable burden. "What was the job, Dad?" I asked, like a little kid who had just learned a new thing in school and wanted all the answers to the universe in one day. "Well, the job was to go to an empty apartment and sit in there for 60 minutes. "So the job was to go to an apartment and just sit for $100K? Seriously? So did you take the job?" I asked him, although it was more of an assertion than a question. He would take the job, wouldn't he? It was easy money, not to mention it was a lot of money. If I'm being truly honest with you, I was gonna refuse. I was confused. Why would my father refuse that kind of money? Paranoia. That ever so creepy feeling that something is gonna happen to you. That you're gonna lose it all the second you hit the jackpot. That the lottery winner will be killed in his sleep. It was a vice that had taken far too many great men in the past, and I could see it creeping up on my father too. But then I took the risk and got ready for the job, except there wasn't much to prepare for. On the surface, it was the simplest of tasks, and before I even knew, the day was there. My father had a very long and tired face by now, as if the burden of his story was something he bore to this very day. I was concerned for him, but I was also interested in the story, so I made no effort to stop him. I reached the place. It was just as promised. A small house on the side of town, a place where people like me would stand out. It was eerily quiet for a normal afternoon, so I was on guard. At least I reached the front door of the place. By now I could feel my heart rise, each thump on my chest a little louder than the last. The place was within expectations, nothing out of the ordinary. A darkly lit hallway proceeded into a dingy room with only a chair. A clock was placed on the chair. I supposed it was to remind me of the time limit, 60 minutes. Couldn't be that hard, could it? He had started to look out of the window now. For the first time in my life, I looked at my dad and saw something human, staring out there into nothing. Dad? Yeah, sorry. So I sat down and waited for the time to finish. It was like hell, staring at the blank wall, one hand on my gun. So for what seemed like an eternity, I waited, and when the hour was up, I left. As simple as that, he said, but I was not buying any of that. A job so big, so high-paying did not require him to do anything. I can see the look in your eyes. I know what you're thinking. There was a time when I felt the same way you did. For days it ate me up alive. Every street, every cafe. I personally don't know if anything or anyone was following me, but I could not shake that feeling that I was watched. So, how did you shake that feeling off eventually? I asked him. He turned towards me, as pale as death itself. That's the thing, son. I never really did. It was like getting hit by a truck and watching your loved one getting hit by a truck at the same time. I started frantically searching my drawer. It was here somewhere. I found it at last. An old newspaper clipping. Paid hitman commits suicide. Reasons unknown. Dad was not here by the window anymore. He hadn't been for the past 5 years. Is this a dream? No, it can't be. I'm sure I'm awake. Was that an image of my father I just created in my head? That would make sense. My father was not this person I had conjured. More importantly, was it trying to tell me something? First days at a new job are never easy, but it helps to take a deep breath before you begin, they say. I would need quite a few to regain myself this time, though. I fold the suit perfectly and put it back in the cupboard. I wouldn't need it anymore. This happened 4 years ago, and I never told anyone about it. Even the few people who were there have decided to not believe it, which I understand. It's easier that way. Unfortunately, I don't have that option. Summer of 2016, 3 friends and I set off to a buddy's house for a long weekend of camping and doing drugs. Might as well be honest about it. To give context, we were all in our low to mid-20s, all guys. The guy whose house we went to, his name is Rob. I knew him the least of everyone involved. One of the guys who drove out there with us, Dan, is a high school friend of mine. He knew Rob through work. Those guys drove forklifts at this warehouse that summer, and Rob became a steady connection for the harder drugs we were all interested in experimenting with. We live in a small town, and had all been drinking and smoking weed since we were 14, 15, but only Dan had any experience with anything harder until that summer. He'd done coke a few times, Molly, tripped on shrooms with his younger brother, but mostly that stuff was hard to come by, and none of us wanted to put in the effort to find it. Enter Rob. Enter our gateway. It was a very fun summer. I'd met Rob a handful of times, usually at Dan's apartment, or the parking lot where they worked, and almost always to buy something fun off him. I tried coke a few times, found it boring. Probably it was bad coke, or maybe it's just not my drug. The most it did was make me talk more than I'm comfortable, always leaving me with that nagging feeling that I overshared all night long when I would try to drift off to sleep at 6 a.m. the next day. Molly was more my thing. I liked the way it made me not care about the negative bullshit constantly swirling in my head. That and Xanax. Both made me feel human for a few hours. Anyway, the day I need to talk about, Dan, Ray, Nick, and I all met up at Dan's place. We'd each brought a sleeping bag, some weed, a few bottles. The plan was to drive out to Rob's. He lived outside of town, where things turned rural very quickly. He said there was great hiking all within a few miles from his house. We would spend the first night at his place, the next camped out, and then return Sunday, of course enjoying heightened consciousness the entire time. Everyone was excited. We were still young enough that none of us really had any real responsibilities. We were basically big kids with a little money and a lot of energy. Dan and Rob were going to take LSD the first night to kick off the weekend. Their plan was to start coming up as the sun went down, in hopes that they'd be peaking when the sky was dark and full of stars. Rob's house really was in the middle of nowhere. No light pollution, no neighbors, just dark skies and the natural light of the cosmos. Because I wanted to pace myself and enjoy the weekend, I had a habit back then of kicking off every weekend with too much drinking and feeling sick all Saturday and most of Sunday. I volunteered to be their trip sitter the first night. I would have some drinks, maybe give coke another try. Rob said his newest stuff was real fish scale, and I wanted to close the book on whether or not cocaine was for me, but keep a reasonably clear head in case anyone started having a bad time. Nick decided to join me in the responsibility. He was mostly a stoner and didn't have a big desire to go further than that. He lived close to 90% of his life high, so even if he were a few blunts deep, I knew I could trust him to help steady any sort of turbulent situation. We'd been best friends since elementary school, and of everyone in our group of friends, I trusted him the most. When it comes to Ray, I should probably give some backstory, but I'm going to keep that brief. We'd all known Ray since elementary school, small town and all, and even though most people feigned ignorance, it was no secret that he'd grown up rough, abusive, alcoholic dad, drug-addicted mother. He had his issues, but who doesn't? I say all this so it won't sound crazy that he wanted to try heroin the first night. We wouldn't let him mainline it. That seemed too much like something a junkie would do. His plan was to snort a line, maybe two, doze off peacefully. None of us were the type to lecture. Our friend wanted to try something, and we wanted to make sure he was safe while he did. Rob had Narcan at the house, and knew what he referred to as real junkies. We trusted him to measure the doses and make sure everything was straight. The night began with music and beers. Everyone was in a good mood. We had a few hours of sunlight left, and Rob had a fire going behind his old, shabby house. There was a lake in the distance and we cooked hot dogs over the fire. We lined our stomachs and then set out on the real adventure. Rob measured out 2 lines of dark gray powder on the table and sighed for Ray. The first was skinnier and shorter. "We'll start with that one," he said, snorting the residue on his thumb from dividing the lines. "Should be enough to have you flying. Some people have a natural tolerance, so if that's not enough, you can do the second one." "He's good with that?" Nick asked. "Yeah, no doubt," Rob said. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small white bottle with a tube at the end. Tapped it on the table. "Got this if anything happens. Wake him up in less than 2 seconds. Perfectly safe." The bottle looked like Flonase to me, but he was the expert. Being that Ray was going the hardest, he went first. He leaned over the table, shut his left nostril and plugged the right one with a rolled $20 bill, and snorted the thin line. "Wow." He sat up, snorted a few times, shook his head, then he laughed. "Holy fucking shit." He was smiling ear to ear, which made the rest of us smile. Ray normally kept a stone-faced expression, hard and tight. Now his eyes were wide and glossy, and he was leaning back on the couch. "Oh yeah," he said, laying back. Nick patted his arm and said, "Have a good trip, fella." "How will we know if something's wrong?" I asked, trying to take my job seriously. I'd had a few beers and still felt mentally there, but a few more, and I'd need the coke to level me out. Luckily, Rob was already laying that on the table, along with a few tabs of acid and tinfoil. "What's that?" he asked, looking at me through the small bag of flaky white powder. "Do I need to keep an eye on him?" "Oh, nah. He barely took any. Surprised it put him down. I guess if he starts choking or sounds like he can't breathe right, just hit him with this." He threw the Narcan to me, which I fumbled and dropped on the ground. "Ready to meet God?" he said to Dan. "Fuck yeah, let's do it." So they each put 2 tabs under their tongues, and 20 minutes later, they were in the backyard, laying on sleeping bags. We turned all the outside lights off and dimmed the inside ones. I couldn't see anything outside the windows, only my own reflection. Ray was laying on the couch, his eyes closed and a half smile fixed on his lips. His breathing was even and regular, and eventually I stopped watching so closely. Nick was finishing a blunt, and I had just done my first line. "Coke is lame," I said to Nick, wiping my nose. I could feel it dripping down the back of my throat, a sensation that is normally unpleasant, but thanks to some neutral conditioning, I've come to associate with pleasure. It just makes me feel sober again. He laughed his stone laugh and rubbed his red eyes. "Seriously, I drank like 6 beers, and that line just got rid of them. I feel like I could take the fucking SAT again and crush it." I pulled out my phone to check the score of the Cavs game, and saw I had no service. Damn, no bars. Fucking T-Mobile. "You know the score of the game?" Nick checked his phone. "Nothing." "How's this motherfucker live out here with no service?" I asked. I could hear the excited pitch of my voice, and wondered again if that was the cocaine, or just a little fast talking. But I was happy too, just excited about existing. I opened Rob's laptop and checked the game. His internet was spotty, but it worked. "Must use the Wi-Fi to conduct his business," I said. "Buddy's got a landline," Nick said, pointing to the phone on the wall. "I asked him about it when you were in the bathroom. Made some joke about how he's gotta be the last man on earth selling drugs on a landline. Dude fucking looks at me all serious and says, 'Don't touch that phone.' As if I wanted to or something. He's strange, man." "Most drug dealers that live out in the boonies are," I said. I tried to look out the glass door. But again, only my reflection showed. Assuming that Rob and Dan were tripping somewhere in the dark grass, I crossed to the kitchen and lifted the phone from its cradle. There was a weak dial tone ringing in my ear. I cracked another beer and chopped another line. Nick was packing the bong he'd brought along, bobbing his head to the low music we had going. Suddenly, Ray sat up with a gasp. "Welcome back, homie," Nick said, ripping the bong. Ray's hair was all matted and his eyes were low, like he'd been roused from a 3-hour nap. "How was it?" I asked. "It was heaven." We all laughed at that. "Think I should check on them out there?" I asked Nick, only remembering that I was trip-sitting now, that Ray was back in our world. "Probably a good idea," he said. So I opened the glass door and turned on the flashlight. I swept the yard a few times and didn't see them. "Yo, Dan, where you guys at?" I circled the house and then went back in. "I can't find them," I said. "Should we be worried? I feel like this is the type of shit a trip sitter is supposed to prevent." "I'm sure they're fine, man," Nick said. He was eating a bag of hot Cheetos with his feet up. "Rob does this shit like every weekend. Probably just wanted a darker spot to see the stars." "Yeah, or they lost their shit and went stumbling off hunting fairies or something." "I don't think that's what acid does. You've been watching too many movies." "Guess you're right." The landline rang, loud and shrill. It cut through the music and the darkness in the living room, making us all jump. It rang 3 times, then stopped. "Jesus," I said, my heart beating in my neck. "Please leave your message after the tone," Nick imitated, his voice flat and robotic. "Think I'm gonna do that other line," Ray said. He'd been sitting on the couch quietly since waking up, his leg jumping nervously. The phone only made him more on edge. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said. "First one put you down, and that one is like twice as big." I nodded off for less than an hour. Heroin is supposed to last longer. Maybe it's shitty stuff like his coke. "Come on, James, stop killing the vibe." "Neither of us have ever done heroin," I said, shrugging at Nick. "I don't like the idea of being responsible for you, especially with those 2 idiots missing." "You're not responsible for me," he said, and before I could get another word in, his head was lowered and he was snorting up the second line. Jesus, I said for the second time. Ray leaned back and immediately closed his eyes. He moaned and slumped over, his hand crossing over his chest. Nick looked nervous, which doubled my anxiety. He's always calm. We gotta actually watch him this time, I said to him. Maybe I should go try to find Dan and Rob too. This sucks, man. I don't like this. Don't leave me here with him, Nick said, sitting up. He rubbed his eyes real hard, the way he always did when we'd pulled over on a blunt ride, trying to sober up fast. Way too high for that level of responsibility. All right, I said, and sat on the couch. Want a bump? Might help you sober up. Nah, suit yourself, I said, another line down, and made it disappear. All right, I said, like pumping myself up. All right, let's go. The next 30 minutes passed in silence. Ray slept, occasionally snoring. Nick zoned out. Staring at the wall, my eyes darted back and forth from Ray, the bag of coke, the phone on the wall. I was becoming very uncomfortable. Paranoid. I blamed the coke and vowed not to take any more. I didn't want to be trip-sitting. Didn't want to be at this sketchy house out in the sticks. And where the fuck was Dan? Was he okay? Everything had gotten weird too fast. Then Ray started choking. The sound was like someone gagging. His chest hitched, his face contorted. I noticed his lips were bluish. Fuck, I think he's choking. I got up and turned him on his side. Immediately he puked his hot dogs back up on Rob's couch. We need an ambulance, Nick said. We need a fucking ambulance. He just kept repeating it, shuffling on his feet. We lived in a state with a pretty strict Good Samaritan law, meaning you were supposed to feel comfortable calling 911 in case of an overdose without worrying about going to jail. I'd heard it didn't always go the way it was supposed to, but didn't care in that moment. I wasn't going to watch my friend choke on his own vomit or fall into a sleep he'd never wake up from. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Silence met my ears. No bars. Fuck, no service. You try. Should I be doing CPR? How do I do CPR? I slapped Ray on the face as Nick tried 911. Ray, wake up, bro. It's not fucking working. I got nothing, dude, he said, throwing his phone on the couch. The Narcan. But it was gone. I couldn't remember where I'd put it. You gotta use the landline, Nick said, pointing at it with his chin, like he was scared of it. I was too. Why? Look for the fucking Narcan, I said, grabbing the phone. He seemed relieved to have his task instead of mine, immediately dropped to the ground and began searching. I pressed 9, then 1, then 1, listening to the thready, uneven dial tone in my ear. The phone rang once, crackling with static, then again. On the third ring, a voice picked up, quiet and far away. 911, what's your emergency? It was a woman's voice, steady and professional. My friend is overdosing, I screamed. I told myself to keep calm as the line rang, but that was immediately abandoned once I heard a voice on the other end. We need an ambulance. Please hurry. Sir, what is your location? Oh, fuck. Nick, what's the address? What? The address? I don't know, man. He was on his knees, pulling the Narcan out from the chair it had rolled under when Rob threw it at me. We're on Lane 71 out in Bushwick. Real long road, lots of farms. There's a lake, too. Fuck. There are like only 3 houses out here. It's the light yellow one. 1 story, red truck in the yard. Silence on the other end. Hello? Do you hear me? Sir, I need you to calm down. What did your friend take? Heroin. He's fucking choking and shit. His lips are all blue. You need to hurry. Can you perform CPR while I get an ambulance to you? She asked, her voice low and monotone. Just another day at the office. Nick, do CPR, I yelled. Shouldn't I use this? He said, holding the little white bottle, but the woman was speaking in my ear, and I was distracted. She just said something about hell. What? I asked the faraway, scratchy voice at the other end of the line. I said you're doing well, James. How? I know he's your friend. Static flared, canceling her voice. Afraid of the dark? I can't hear you. I said. My tongue felt numb, and not from the coke. My legs were rubber. I wanted to fall over. James, he's fucking dying. Nick screamed, taking the top of the bottle. How do I do this shit? I said he'll be okay, as long as he's not afraid of the dark. The woman on the phone laughed. Did he tell you how to use this? Nick's voice was farther than the quiet voice on the phone. Somehow, I was falling into it, losing my sense of place. I could see Nick putting the top back on, jamming the bottle up Ray's nose, squirting it like the Flonase I thought it was. But that was all distant, unimportant. It's very dark where he is, she said. And darker where he's going, where you're all going. We have Narcan, I said, mumbling, just speaking to feel real again. I don't know how to use it. Wake up, Nick was shouting, smacking Ray's pale cheeks. Then I heard Ray's voice through the phone. Please, he said. I don't want to go. The woman's laughing got deeper, distorted. Then the pitch reversed and started climbing higher, until it was more of a scream than a laugh. A horrible shrieking. It exploded out of the phone, and I dropped it. Ray sat up suddenly, his eyes wide and white and bulging. He screamed, No, don't make me. Nick hugged him. He was crying now, and I think I was too. Ray pushed him off, looking around the room wildly before his eyes settled on mine. You were there, he said. I saw you. I dropped to my knees and hugged him too. No ambulance ever came. We didn't see Dan until the next morning when he showed up at the door, alone. The last thing he remembered was Rob telling him he knew a place with a better view of the sky. It's bigger there, he said, leading Dan into the woods. This was as they were coming up. He spent the rest of the night wandering, running from voices he thought were coming from his head, even though he could hear them with his ears. We never found Rob. We never went back to his house. Far as I know, there was no one to miss him besides his customers. Never read about his disappearance on the news. We all tried not to think about that night. Especially Ray and me. I tried explaining what happened to Nick. He listened, and he didn't doubt me. But as time went on, I could see him closing himself off to it, trying to make it less real. I never bothered telling Dan. Ray and I had talked about it once. This was a few weeks before he overdosed again, this time alone. This time for good. He told me, You were there, in the darkness. I heard your voice and I followed it back. Thank you. We hugged, and when his face left my chest, it was wet. I don't know what was on the other end of that phone, and I hope to never find out. I'm afraid of the dark. I was leading a great life, partying with friends, working my ass off and getting my paycheck to make ends meet. My life was just as normal as any other life. That is, until I stumbled across the cursed remote. My life wasn't normal anymore. It started a year ago. Another tiring day at work, as usual. I worked 6 days a week, and spent Sunday chilling at home. I was usually the last person to leave the office, but today, Marcus, one of my friends who was 2 rows away from where I sat, was still typing and checking through files when I was packing. Hey Marcus, busy day, huh? I said. Yeah, Andrew, you would know 'cause you're the most hardworking guy here, eh? He replied. We both giggled. Alright dude, gotta get home or I'll be stuck in traffic, I said, hurriedly slinging my backpack over my shoulders. Got the keys, got my phone. Shit, I almost forgot my bottle. See you tomorrow, Andrew. Drive safe, Marcus said, eyes still fixed on his monitor. Bye-bye, I replied. I got into the elevator and went down into the parking lot. It was a pleasant drive home, listening to music while getting stuck in traffic here and there. I finally got home after a 45-minute drive. As I parked my car in the driveway, I noticed something on my porch. It was a small box, the size of one of those Amazon packages which contain books. Strange. I didn't remember ordering anything. I checked the address on it. It was my address. It couldn't have been a mistake. Maybe it was for me. After mulling it over, I decided to take it inside. After eating an omelet I made for myself, I went to my room and grabbed a knife to open the package. It was a white box which was taped with black tape. I curiously slid open the package and found a remote which had only one button on it. It looked like one of those sticky bomb detonators you'd find in one of those games. I forget which, that were used to detonate the bombs. I pressed the button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again. Nothing happened. Oh well, I don't even know who gave it to me, I said, a bit disappointed. Freebies tend to be like that. I threw it on my night desk, switched the light off, and pulled the covers over me. The next morning I was riding to work when I saw Marcus. And I almost puked. Bloodied and bruised with his bones displaced, he was laying on the ground. I'll spare you all the gory details. You couldn't tell it was Marcus at all. His bike was next to him, crushed. I slammed on the brakes and ran over to his corpse, already in tears. Apparently, when he was riding to work, he was run over by a truck. The police and the ambulance arrived quickly after that, and when they were taking him away, I saw it. A note in his hand. It was folded, and the word Andrew was written in block letters. I asked him for a second and grabbed the note from his hand. I went to my car and opened it. I froze when I read the 3 words in block letters on the paper. You did it. I had stopped crying by now. I read those 3 words again and again and again. What had I done? Was it because of me? Did I kill Marcus? Impossible. I didn't even know of his death until minutes ago, when he was already dead. I had a feeling of dread for the rest of the day. Work was, as usual, tiring, and I was glad to finally finish another day of work. I got into the elevator, still thinking about that note. I did what? And who wrote that note? Marcus couldn't have had time to write it. I was told that he was instantaneously crushed. The chime of the elevator interrupted my thoughts and indicated that I could get off. I walked to my car, and I froze. There was a paper stuck on my car with print on it. You pressed the button. Suddenly, it all came back. I was horrified. Chills ran down my spine as I realized what the button did. I started up my car and drove home as fast as I could. With only one thing in my mind, I must destroy that remote. Once I got home, I dashed to the bedroom, grabbed the remote and ran back down. I closed the door behind me with a bang and ran to the car. I threw the remote into the glove box and floored it. There was a lake nearby, and it was part of the plan to destroy the remote. I ran into my friend, Larry, on the way. He waved at me, but I just sped past. Once I reached there, I got out and grabbed the remote from the glove box. I heard it click against my thumb. Chills ran down my spine. But if I destroyed the remote, it couldn't kill anyone, right? I stomped on it and threw it into the lake. Everything was going to be okay. Then there was an explosion. I jumped and turned back. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then a wave of fright ran through me. "Oh shit, Larry," I exclaimed, sprinting to the car. I floored it again, hoping and praying that my fears weren't true. They were. As soon as I arrived there, I saw the body of a familiar face burning, next to a burning truck attached to a barrel containing oil. "Larry. Jesus, no, Larry," I exclaimed, as he burst into flames and I burst into tears. The fire truck arrived at that moment, then the ambulance came a few minutes later, putting his burnt corpse onto the stretcher. There was another note next to my knee. I picked it up as a teardrop fell on it, smudging the ink that had the same word on it. Andrew. When I opened it up, I froze, and my stomach started churning. In small letters this time it said, "Escape is impossible, Andrew." I drove home in a mix of emotions. I was in tears and fright at the same time. When I got home, I was deep in thought. What did it mean by escape is impossible? I got rid of it. It can't be trouble anymore. I made myself a bowl of cereal and watched some episodes of The Big Bang Theory before I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up without any nightmares or dreams. Finally, a Sunday. I was going to watch some Netflix after eating when I heard the doorbell ring. I opened the door and a chill ran down my spine. I screamed. It was Marcus. "How are you alive?" I exclaimed in fright. "What the heck are you talking about?" Marcus said with a confused look. "Don't play games with me, Marcus. I saw you dead after you were crushed by a truck." I stuttered. "What the hell is wrong with you? I'm perfectly fine, dude. Marcus, son. Irritated. Something dawned upon me. And Larry? I asked, to which Marcus said, he's fine too. Have you been hallucinating? Do you need any help? This was strange. I remembered it all like a vivid dream. I looked at both of their corpses. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I was hallucinating. Or maybe it was a dream. Marcus broke my thought process and then said something that will forever send chills down my spine. Hey dude, I noticed this parcel on your table and decided to open it once I got home. Here you are. It's a remote. It has only one white button. I pressed it like 20 times, but nothing happened.
Hey everybody, I just want to start this by saying these stories are going to be a little different than usual. Most of the time I don't read stories from subscribers. Most of my stories come from me finding people on the internet with stories to tell. But all these stories here are from subscribers, they're unedited, and this is my way of saying thank you for supporting my channel. Enjoy! Number 1. Graveyards. I like graveyards. I live next to one, actually. It's not gated off or anything. It's just a graveyard that sits on the side of the neighborhood that I live in. It is an older graveyard. It doesn't have any lights in it. It does have asphalt paths, however, wide enough for several people to walk side by side on one. I don't scare very well. I know a lot of people claim this in their scary stories. I tend to believe them all, since I am like that too. But I do sometimes get scared when I'm walking around and it's really dark outside. So you probably see where this story is going. There are times when it is dark and quiet at night that I decide to go out and walk in that graveyard. It was always very dark. I could always see the path I was walking on, and I could see everything that was close to me, but it was always like seeing shadows and not objects. Well, anyway, this took place in the fall. I was a bit bored. I stay up usually pretty late into the night, and I was watching a movie. It was really windy outside, and I began hearing the wind blowing hard, making that whistling noise that it tends to make. I've always loved that sound so much. So of course, I decided that I would go and take a walk through the graveyard. It was cool. I wish that I was a better writer. If I was, I might be able to do a much better job as a writer to explain what it was like. But it seemed like everything in the world had paused. I really liked it. It was fun walking around there. While I was walking, I noticed something. When I got a little closer, I saw the shadow of a figure standing there in the path. It wasn't very close to me, and I knew it was a person too. At first I just assumed it was someone else out for a walk, but the person wasn't moving. He or she was just standing in place. I decided maybe it was somebody visiting a grave late at night. So I turned around and walked the other way. I figured for many reasons that it was not a good idea to bother someone who was in the cemetery in the middle of the night. After I walked away a while, I thought I heard something. Then I turned around, and I noticed that the guy was following me. Or at least he was walking in the same direction as me. And he was walking a bit quicker than me too. I sort of felt my heart jump just a little bit, just out of surprise, but it wasn't really bad. I have to admit to being mildly scared, but I really didn't think there was anything bad about the guy out there. He was walking quickly. It made me a bit uncomfortable, and I decided I would step to the side, walk a little slower, and let him pass me up. It took a few moments, but yeah, he eventually caught up to me. And as he passed me, something hard touched my shoulder, and I realized he had tapped me with the flat side of a knife blade. And I almost didn't hear what he said to me, but I did. "Get out now, if you know what's best for you." And then he turned around and walked back in the direction that he had come from, and I was shocked. It was such a strange exchange. He didn't hurt me, but he just did a very frightening thing instead. I was sitting there wondering, and I wasn't sure what I should do, but I guess it quickly became obvious. Get out of the damn cemetery. So I left. I went home quickly. The following day, since I was curious to see what he was doing in the graveyard, I went back and searched the area that he was in. I didn't see any signs of anything, so I have no idea to this day what he was doing and why he didn't want me there when he did it. I'll start this by saying that I'm somewhat psychic. I always have been. I can hear spirits and other entities, but rarely see them. Instead of forms, I can see energy, portals, and will see sparks of light instead of complete images. I have no doubt that our soul is separate from our bodies, and when someone dies, they can choose to stay earthbound or leave. A spirit who chooses to stay earthbound is the classic ghost that people will get glimpses of. However, it's not just human spirits that stay in the spirit realm, which is the fourth dimension. There are many more sinister things out there. I am from the Midwest, Illinois to be exact. My grandparents bought a home in the country where they raised their kids, including my mother. We lived about 2 miles from them in town and would visit them often at their country home. This home is a tri-level with no basement, but a lower level, which was my grandfather's TV watching area. The lower level also had a crawl space, which gave me a foreboding feeling. Ever since I can remember, that lower level made me uneasy. And let me say that when you feel like you are being watched, you are. This is what is known as the sixth sense. I always knew something was not right with this house, but couldn't put my finger on it, except for the lower level, and the shed out back really gave me the willies. When I was 14, I moved in with my grandparents due to my mother and I not getting along. My bedroom was what is referred to as the corner bedroom, because it's in the corner of the upper level. My first night in that room, my eyes were constantly being drawn to the closet doors. The doors are the kind that have slats across the upper half, instead of being a solid door. I could feel something looking at me through those slats. I wasn't one of those kids who was always afraid of the closet, so it wasn't that. I could actually feel eyes on me at all times. Almost immediately after moving in, I would hear one of my grandparents walking up the wooden steps. I look up to see who it was, and then no one would be there. This was daily. They would always tell me it's the old house settling. I didn't buy that crap at 14, and I don't buy it now at 44. Settling noises don't sound like footsteps. One day after school, neither of them were home, and I was home alone watching TV and eating a snack. The lower level was dark, and I knew something was at the bottom of the stairs, just watching me. I couldn't see it, but I can use my sixth sense and just know certain things. So I knew exactly where this entity was, and I knew it wasn't a human spirit. I also knew it was pure evil. I could feel it, and if you've ever felt pure evil, it's an icy cold feeling of pure terror. I don't know how I knew, but it started to charge up the steps, So I ran outside and sat waiting for someone to get home. I sat out there for hours. I told them what happened, but I was told it was nothing and not to be afraid. I was getting pretty pissed off at that point. I was a rebellious teen, and I wasn't going to accept all these cliche answers they were giving me, but they wouldn't say anything else about it. So one night, I was up late while my grandparents were sleeping, and decided, even though I wasn't tired, I should try to sleep, because I had school in the morning. As soon as I laid my head on my pillow, the sleep paralysis started coming on. Plus, I had just laid down and wasn't even tired. I knew I was awake. I could hear my grandpa snoring and could feel something moving out of my closet and to the bed right beside me. You know that feeling you get when someone walks up behind you, but you don't really hear it? It's like the air changes or something. And that's how I can sense these things. Well, thank God I had my eyes closed, and I couldn't see what this was. I fear I would have died from a heart attack at 14 years old. I could feel this thing was very tall and was looking down at me. It spoke only one sentence. "I'm watching you." My blood ran ice cold to the point where it was painful. It felt like shards of glass were flowing through my veins. I've had sleep paralysis before at my mom's house, and I knew if I tried hard enough to move my head from side to side that I could break it, and that's what I did. As soon as I was free, I ran screaming into my grandparents' bedroom, and from that night on, my grandmother slept with me every night until I moved out on my own. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I found out the truth. When my grandparents bought the house, the lower level had an upside-down pentagram built into the tile. They didn't know what it was and just covered it over with carpet. The shed out back was used to breed ravens. The corner bedroom was the most haunted, with every single guest they had stay in there, having some kind of experience. And when my uncle was young, that was his bedroom, and every night he would have night terrors and would scream several times a night. Last year my grandfather died, and I flew home for a few days. I took pictures of the lower level and the crawl space. I showed a friend of mine, who is a psychic medium, a picture of the crawl space, and she started crying. She said a teenage girl was murdered and devil worship sacrifices in there, and then buried under the dirt. She could see her and feel her fear. It was horrible. She refused to look at any more pictures. I know the entity who was watching me was a demon, and I've asked my family to have the crawl space dug up, but they won't. If I ever inherit that house, that's the first thing I will do, and then maybe burn it to the ground. Number 3. Hi Killer Orange Cat. I just wanted to start off by saying I'm a huge fan, and I really love your videos. But you probably hear that all the time, so I'll move on to my story. A while back my family and I used to live in this really old house. I was really young, so I don't really remember anything, except for what my family told me. The first night we slept there, the door was swinging back and forth, and they all had nightmares. It sounded like something out of a movie, so everyone had their own fair share of really scary stories while they were at that house. Not to mention my family and I are not superstitious at all, but we started to get really bad luck there, so eventually we moved to a different home. But my dad kept the house for his job, and it stayed vacant for a long time. Occasionally, we would go over there and clean it up a little. So one time, I was in my brother's old bedroom with my sister. We were facing each other and talking, and I felt a hard kick on my leg. So I turned around, but there was nothing there. I told my sister, and we were both really confused and creeped out, obviously. And my sister said my leg kinda jolted forward, as if something had kicked it. And then while we were standing there trying to figure things out, a picture fell off the wall that had been perfectly hanging there for years. Needless to say, my sister and I booked it down the stairs to tell our mom. Supposedly, there were a bunch of nuns living in the house, and they all died in the home. Another time, when my sister was really little, she walked by my brother's room and saw a man with long, dark hair standing over my brother and watching him sleep. And then he disappeared. But now that my brother's all grown up, he looks just like the guy that was standing over my brother. My dad is the least superstitious person you may ever meet. He was in the basement, and he turned around and saw a blonde woman with a really scary face standing behind him and glaring. And then she disappeared after he blinked. Once my mom was sleeping, and she woke up and saw my dad playing with my brother in his crib. And she turned around and saw my dad sleeping next to her. The other guy was gone when she turned back around, which we think to be a jinn, which in our culture is something that was mentioned in the holy books, and people kind of took it out of context. Number 4. This happened yesterday, and it was the most scary experience of my life. Yesterday I was bored, so I began wondering what to do. So I had an idea to go for a swim. I then went to the shed in my backyard and got a pool float, and then I started to go for a walk. I was going to walk up to the creek and go for a swim. When I arrived at the creek, I jumped into the water and started swimming. I was having a lot of fun, so I kept swimming. I told myself I was going to go as far as I can go, so I kept swimming, and I then swam under a bridge. After a good moment of time, I swam under another bridge, but like the other bridge, I saw nothing there. After a long time of swimming, it was starting to get dark. I was wondering if I should go back, but I did not go back. I kept swimming, and then I found another bridge. But I saw the most disturbing thing I ever saw in my life. I saw someone in the distance. I could not see it first, but then as I got closer, I saw someone hanging on a rope. The person had hung himself, and I went up to him to see if he was alive. I tapped on his shoulder, but he did not respond. I then tried feeling his pulse, but his heart did not beat. I began really freaking out, so I yelled, "Someone, call 911. There was a dead body, but no one heard me. I then had an idea to go to someone's house and tell them to call 911. So I walked out of the woods and I found an ice cream truck, and I told the ice cream man to call 911, and he did. The cops came very fast. After that, I told the cops where the body was, and they found it. Let's just say, it was a really hard sleep that night. Number 5. This happened when I was in the 9th grade. My church group used to go to a place called Silver Bay every Memorial Day, which is in upstate New York. Silver Bay has several hotel buildings, a gym, activities, an auditorium building, a church building, an ice cream shop, a cafeteria building, and several other buildings. One of the buildings just so happened to be abandoned. My friends and I looked at it for years and always wondered what was inside. Finally, one year, I asked my friends if they wanted to explore the building. At first they said no, but they ended up coming around to the idea, and they all wanted to. The first time we went, it was 3 of us, my friends Jack, Aiden, and I. We ended up finding a very old door. My friend Jack punched it down. Right away, we saw a small hallway. To the right, there was a staircase. The 3 of us went into the building and started to make our way up the first flight of stairs and onto the second, where at the top of the second flight of stairs, there was a door with a small window in it. And that's important later on. On the second flight of stairs, Aiden and I heard footsteps. We got scared then and we ran out of the building. We told the rest of our friends and we decided to go back later that night. We ended up going back, but with our full group. That would be Eric, Dylan N, Dylan H, Jack, Aiden, and I. We went the exact same way. On the second flight of stairs, Eric and I saw a really scary man on the other side of the door. I got the best look at him. He was a redhead, had a beard, had a bunch and raggedy clothes, and we were scared that we were found in the building. Scared, we all ran out of the building, and we were freaked out. No one was supposed to be in there. We were all freaked out and did not go back. We all went to the main building on campus and asked the front desk staff what the building was. They told us it was still in use. We knew that was a lie. The doors had locks on them, the type of locks you'd see on lockers at schools. We all went back to our hotel building and went to our rooms for the night. We ended up going back the next night, this time with 2 college kids. We went through the whole building, and there were no signs of any squatters. Here's where things take a creepy turn. The final day we were at Silver Bay, the president of my congregation, Paul, called us to the corner of the cafeteria with our parents. We were in trouble. A staff member had reported us for being at the abandoned building. We met with the owner of Silver Bay, Chad, later that morning. He told us every night a staff member does a sweep of the abandoned building. He told us there was no damage on Saturday night. The first time we went, it was Saturday afternoon. The staff reported and took pictures of kicked-in doors and smashed windows inside the building, and we hadn't done any of that. Something I wish I brought up too. I noticed worn-out sneakers, empty popcorn bags, and empty Coke bottles in a trash can next to the entrance. The one me and my friends went through. That should have been a red flag to us that people were in the building. The part of this that sends chills down my spine to this very day. For one of the Silver Bay meals, some of the members of my congregation sat with a man. They could tell something was off with him by his eye contact. They said he had no name tag on, which everyone at my congregation was required to wear at Silver Bay. He also told them he was living up the road from the Silver Bay campus, in a place with no power, food, or water. He would read his Bible every night and pray. He was thankful he found Silver Bay because he could get free food, water, and stay in a place with power. 3 years later, this story still freaks me out. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I know these stories are a lot different than the ones I normally read, but as I said, I don't do a lot of subscriber submitted stories, so whenever a subscriber submits a story, I do like to read it, even if it's different than what I normally read, to thank them for listening and taking the time to send it in. I really appreciate everybody who listens to my channel and takes the time to do anything, especially if you send in a story. So for everyone who's done that, I want to thank you very much. There'll be more videos coming out in the next few days, including a collaboration with Mortis Media. Well, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. And as usual, most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, 'cause you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.